I've been reading lots of books for my doctorate degree, and one book that I came across really got my attention. It's a small book that you can read in just a couple hours, and it's called Autopsy of a Deceased Church. The author, Tom Rainer, is a consultant on church revitalization. From counseling with many struggling churches over the years, he became an expert on, you could say, dying churches. He can predict with incredible accuracy how long a church has because it will before it will close its doors if it is not doing well. Sometimes they last, he says, maybe a couple of years longer than that, but they always die. In fact, by the time a church is dying, he says, it is impossible to reverse. Why? Because the people in that church don't want to make any changes. He categorizes the churches into 4 categories: healthy, churches that show symptoms of sickness, churches that are very sick, and churches that are dying. Now, I would have thought that out of this list, there would be a pretty good amount of churches that are healthy. Well, there aren't. He says that there are only 10% of churches that are healthy. Everybody else, 40%, have symptoms of sickness, certain symptoms of sickness. 40% are very sick, and 10% are dying. Now, this book was published about 10 years ago, but it's still just as true. The factors he talks about haven't changed. I mean, you just pick it up and read it, you'll see. One of those factors that indicate a church is sick is that the members see the past as the hero. Now, we should respect the past, but we can't live in the past and we can't hold it up as a standard. And this is what blew my mind. The members were not fighting over morality or biblical truths, saying that, we as a church have been walking away from these things. They were fighting for the good old days. What did the deceased churches cling to? Whatever made them comfortable and happy. So when they wanted their own worship styles, they didn't want them to change. They wanted fixed orders of worship services. Times of worship services better not change. Their building better not change. The rooms, they wanted to stay the same. The carpets, they didn't want that touched. The pulpits, it had to be the one that somebody made for them 30 years ago. What else did they cling to? Their own needs instead of others. They looked inwardly instead of outwardly. They were more concerned about protecting the way they did church than reaching residents of the community. There was no heart for ministry to the community. They were good at spending money, but on themselves, not on others. The author made the point that members in these dying churches actually preferred death to change. The reality is this: every church could die if we don't reverse the symptoms of sickness. It might take years for a certain church to die, because it can be dying for years before it happens. Or it can be living with sickness for years because nobody ever figures out that there is sickness among them and they need to fix it. The reason why it's so difficult to tell when a church is sick, because the erosion is slow. Have you ever been to a town, or maybe you were born in one, that was full of life and bustling, and then you came back 10 years later, 20 years later, and you see the erosion, the decline? But when you talk to the people there, they'll tell you, oh no, it's the same. It's never changed. We see the opposite too with our kids, don't we? With Giannis, who is 3 now, whenever somebody doesn't see him for a month, they will inevitably comment, wow, he's so much bigger. I don't see it because I'm with him every single day. That's exactly what happens to churches. We don't see it because we are in it. We live in it. When Tom Rainer tried to help churches before they were going to close, most of the members fought him, saying, "Everything is fine. What are you talking about?" And then sure enough, 5 years later, the church had closed its doors. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because another huge symptom of sickness is lack of prayer. The church that rarely prays together dies. When the author was doing the research, he interviewed people from these different churches that had died, and he asked them questions. He always asked them the same questions. He would ask them, did the church members pray together? Whenever he asked this question, they would pause and they weren't sure how to answer it, and they would eventually say, well, yeah, sure, we prayed together. We prayed during the church services, and then we had a Wednesday night prayer meeting. And then he would ask them, okay, well, describe those prayer times. And they hemmed and hawed and said, well, maybe a handful of people would show up, and, one person would pray over a list of prayer needs, and then we ate together. And then he would ask them, do you really think that was meaningful time in prayer? And of course, they said no. But then this is the next question. Do you think that's how the New Testament churches prayed? That's such a simple question, but so profound. If somebody asks us that, we know that's not what we do. But we don't ask ourselves that question, do we? When the conversation continued, they would all talk about how the best days of their church corresponded with the vibrant prayer life. Prayer and the health of a church go hand in hand. Who would have figured, right? In the healthy churches, people wrestle in prayer. They pray fervently, intensely, passionately. It's not uncommon for them to do 24/7 prayer vigils and to fast and pray. One of the guys that Tom interviewed had tears well up in his eyes as he was answering these questions of the interviewer, and then he said, when we stopped taking prayer seriously, our church started dying.